So my name is Lisa Vellante. For those of you who don't know me, I work in the Counseling and Student Success Office in the SCC building, 118. So this is one of our counselor chats. We try to have one every semester on various topics. And if anyone, has any suggestions for further topics in the future, please just let me know and we'll see what we can do. Okay? So I first wanted to start off kind of posing the question, what do you know about ADHD? What is your impressions of it?
Go ahead.
Well, I'm experiencing a bit of it myself. My older son's 11. He has some mild ADHD. He has a very hard time focusing on things like homework and anything that he doesn't want to be doing.
Right.
He has no trouble focusing on his Legos and things like that. But so this is a bit self-serving for me. I want to learn a little bit more what I can do at home. But I've had a few students as well, two this semester.
Yeah.
Very hard time focusing. It's just tough reining them in. They're very easily distracted. In fact,
Right.
last week I was using PowerPoint, and we have Apple TVs in our area, so we can mirror wirelessly from our handhelds to the screen. And as soon as the Apple TV popped up, these movies popped up, and the kid, this student was, "Oh, let's watch a movie," and he was all over the place. And
Yeah.
I had a really hard time getting him back to what we were talking about because that one little thing just took him off the rails.
Set him off the tangent. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I guess for me, what I've experienced, and again, of course, we don't know people's diagnoses, but so a variety of things, but sometimes, from real severe, just a spectrum, and so, or a gradient, whatever you want to call it, so some people seeing really just like almost can't be in the classroom at all, and I'm sort of in a way, this only happened once I guess, but just sort of giving, okay, it's fine if you want to sit way in the back and really have different rules than other people, if you can hang in there, and not disrupt, to just people who, as you're talking about, I'm Kristen, by the way.
I'm Rick, dear.
Hi, Rick.
In music.
Yeah.
Nice to meet you.
So which area are you in?
Music.
Music, okay, psychology, related, right? Musician too. Yeah, so, some much more severe. And then there's the other thing, which personally, particularly as I get older, I really can't stand to sit for an hour in a corner. It's not even healthy.
Right,
you're supposed
right.
to, you got a Fitbit and it says get up, And so I actually, I'm trying different things, but I just, I think actually it's a little easier when you're the age of a lot of kids here because they're so exhausted from running around and doing jobs and stuff.
Right.
They're not as restless as older. But in any case, so I'm very sympathetic. In other words, how do you tease apart being naturally restless the way we should be? It's not good to be sedentary that much from something that's more than that. So I wonder if, is what's different about being ADD versus just being a more active person.
Right.
Who naturally is, after about 20 minutes or something wants to get up and do something,
Right.
And that's normal to me.
Sure, yeah. After the average person after 45 minutes kind of zones out.
Oh, completely.
Right, so someone with ADHD, that's a shorter time span.
Right.
And you had mentioned too, you made a good point about they can focus on things that they're interested in, but things that they're not so interested in. We all have trouble focusing, but we understand deadlines, we understand the consequences, which for individuals with ADHD, that doesn't motivate them. A deadline doesn't motivate them. Consequences don't motivate them. And we'll learn, some of it is it's a neurocognitive disorder. So it does have to do, it's brain-based. It's organic to our biology and to our brain. So we'll go over kind of what it is, how it develops, what it looks like, okay, and some strategies for students, some strategies, for dealing with behavior in the classroom, okay. So I'd like to start with giving some testimonies of people that have ADHD and what it feels like for them. So it's like watching a PowerPoint presentation that never stops. I tell someone something and in the middle of a sentence, I go blank, right? Having ADHD does not feel like anything. Unlike a physical problem, like a broken bone, ADHD is invisible, right? So no one can kind of see the struggle. People offer sympathy when you're in pain, but when you explain that you have ADHD, not so much, right? Like I'm drowning in a maelstrom of stuff that needs to get done, but that I never finish. It's a never-ending feeling of futility, right? It's not easy having an 18-year-old brain in a 61-year-old body, okay? So these are just some accounts. So what is ADHD? So it's attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, right? It is a brain disorder marked by an ongoing pattern of inattention, hyperactivity, and impulsivity, okay, that interferes with functioning and development. So it has three kind of different components. There's three actually subtypes of ADHD. So you can have just the inattentive type. So that's more what we would call ADD, attention deficit disorder. So some individuals just have that trouble with paying attention, focusing, getting things done, time management. So they're usually the ones that are least diagnosed the most, because they're not the ones kind of hyper and looking for the attention, not able to sit, right? Those are the people that are maybe daydreaming in class, not really paying attention, or maybe just have a blank stare kind of in their own world. Then there's individuals that have the inattentive and hyperactivity type. So they wander off tasks, focus, disorganized as well, but they also have that hyperactivity piece. So they're constantly going like they have a motor running, right? Inability to kind of sit still, always fidgeting, right? Always kind of like having to, the ones tapping their pencil, kind of, yeah, moving their feet, fidgeting a lot, okay? And then there's the combined type. So people that have the inattention as well as the hyperactivity and kind of, you know, that impulsivity type, okay? So impulsivity, right, they make it's kind of like doing things and thinking later, right? Not really kind of thinking through their actions, thinking through, you know, they might kind of blurt out in class and not really have that restraint, right? That kind of inability to delay gratification. So this affects not only in school, right, but it can affect them socially. So they might never let somebody talk. They're always interrupting in the class. Not really considering like the long-term consequences, or really kind of thinking about, you know, other people in the classroom. So only a healthcare professional can thoroughly evaluate symptoms and diagnose ADHD. In order to be diagnosed as ADHD, there has to be several symptoms of ADHD occurring in 2 or more settings. So if it's just, you know, I can't concentrate at school, but they're fine socially, they're fine at work, it might not be the ADHD, they might just hate their job, right? Or it might just not be a challenging job. So it has to cause impairment in more than one area. And it does have to be basically discovered in childhood. So a lot of times, you know, adults think they might be diagnosed as ADHD. What they want to do is, a clinician wants to see a history. So what were you like as a child, right? Did you get in trouble a lot in class? Did you get bad grades? Were you able to kind of like get your homework done? Okay, so these symptoms do pop up in childhood. So there's different ways you can diagnose ADHD. Psychiatrists and even like just general doctors will usually just give like a self-assessment checklist. So they'll go down, you know, with a checklist full of statements like it's hard for me to concentrate. And then depending upon how they answer, they could diagnose in that way. Psychologists can also diagnose ADHD, neuropsychologists. So they will give like psychological testing and assessment. So giving them like skills tests, giving them attention tests, like more not self-report, more kind of like objective tests. They will also do a history, ask the family, you know, what they have seen and what kind of symptoms are there. So again, this is still a lot of like self-report things that happens when you're diagnosing. And they say 25% of people with ADHD also have a learning disability. So it's important to kind of distinguish between what is ADHD or what is maybe a learning disability as well. So when we look at like a neuropsychologist, they really want to look at the brain. So they can actually perform brain MRIs and brain scans because they do see differences in someone that has ADHD as opposed to someone that doesn't. But the issue with the brain scans are insurances aren't really going to pay for that. right? It's very expensive. There's a neurocognitive institute, I think I forget the town in New Jersey, but there is one that does basically a workup. So they'll do the self-assessments, they'll do the, objective tests, they'll do the brain scans and the MRIs. But that's not usually how somebody gets diagnosed. It's usually from their general doctor or psychiatrist. Okay, so again, it could be very self-report assessments. And a lot of these symptoms of ADHD can also look like anxiety, can also look like depression, can sometimes even look like bipolar. So it's, it's up to the clinician to really decide if it's really ADHD or not. So what do you think are some of the causes of ADHD? We hear a lot about its social causes, external factors. What do you think,
I
Professor Nelson?
understood it was just less activity in the frontal lobes.
Mm-hmm.
That direct attention.
Right. Mm-hmm.
In other words, inborn.
It is, yeah. And for a long time, it was kind of seen as something, well, okay, he can't pay attention to school, but he can sit on a video game for 5 hours. So he can pay attention, right? But it's not the case. And we'll talk about the concept of hyperfocus. It is a brain-based disorder. And with MRIs and now the functional MRIs where we can actually see brain activity when the person is performing different tasks, right? We know now that there's a lot of differences between someone that doesn't have ADHD and the brain of someone that does. So there's the brain structure abnormality, like you said, specifically in the prefrontal cortex, in the frontal lobe. They've noticed that the prefrontal cortex and the frontal lobe of people that have ADHD are smaller than someone that doesn't. The brain chemistry, so it's imbalance of neurochemicals in the brain, mostly dopamine. So people say, okay, if somebody's hyper, why are you giving them stimulants?
You're stimulating the frontal cortex that makes you pay attention.
Exactly. So it's actually the opposite. Someone that has ADHD, their brain is not making enough dopamine. So they're seeking out really interesting, thrill-seeking behaviors to feel okay, right? So that's why they fidget so much. Not that they have an overabundance of it, but they don't have enough. So they're looking for things to always kind of like increase that dopamine level, okay? So that's why stimulants work. Genetics, so ADHD tends to run in families. And there's also been some studies that the environment kind of can contribute to the genes. So you have your like genetic makeup, your genes, right? And sometimes things in the environment can either turn on or turn off that genes. So which is called your phenotype, how you actually, come out to be. So certain environmental factors that can kind of turn on that gene, smoking during pregnancy complications, substance use during pregnancy.
What about diet? Does diet affect it at all?
Adversely, diet can affect it, especially someone that has ADHD. If their diet, what they say is 90% of your serotonin receptors are in your stomach. 90%. So what you put in your body definitely affects your brain, affects those neurochemicals. So that's one of the treatments, in a comprehensive treatment is to look at the individual's diet and look, are you eating sugary, kind of processed foods, right? So it's about eating healthier, more kind of organic food. So that's definitely one of the treatment of it. But having a poor diet can also contribute to turning that ADHD gene on as well. Mm-hmm.
Louisa,
Yeah.
you said that they can play a video game for hours on end.
Yeah.
Does the activity of doing something like that, the engagement of that, stimulate more dopamine?
Yes.
So that does affect it as well.
Mm-hmm. It's because it's constant action, it's
Right.
constant kind of like, stimulation.
Right.
So their dopamine is getting stimulated by that.
Okay.
So that feels good for them. So they can hyper focus on things that are just highly stimulating. Mm-hmm. But things that are not so stimulating, like sitting in a classroom for 3 hours and listening to a lecture, not as stimulating. So that's when the attention kind of starts to wander and their dopamine levels are not, being kind of stimulated. Exactly. So just looking at a graphic, there's a reduction in size in the frontal lobe, okay? The temporal lobe size, I also see a bit of a reduction in the temporal lobes. Here's a fMRI, so a functional brain scan, so someone with ADHD as opposed to a normal brain. So you could see, they look at kind of your brain thrives on glutamine, right? So thrives on sugar, thrives on that energy. So you could see what's going on in that ADHD brain. Sometimes they're not able to, they feel very overstimulated a lot. So the brain scans look differently. So housed within the frontal lobes is the prefrontal cortex. And that's really the key piece to ADHD. So the prefrontal cortex, they found, doesn't function as well as someone that doesn't have ADHD. Okay? So the prefrontal cortex is responsible for attention, emotional responses, behavior, and judgment. Okay? So the prefrontal cortex also pretty much houses your executive functioning, right? So an executive functioning is basically an umbrella term to include all the different kind of, think of like the hard drive in the computer, right? It kind of modulates and regulates everything that's going on. So this has to do with managing one's thoughts, directed goal behavior, right? Directing someone to do something that they need to do, not necessarily that they want to do. So goal setting, cognitive inhibition, so, delay of gratification, all those things that we take for granted when we have self-control, all those things that basically you might say that adolescents don't really have yet. And in fact, the prefrontal cortex is one of the last parts of the brain to develop. So that's why adolescents really don't have that understanding of consequences, not so great time management skills, right? Need instant gratification, because that area in general is, they say until your mid-20s is when it fully develops, okay? But they found in people that have ADHD, they do have an impairment in that area. And so, a lot of people say, well, how could you diagnose someone, with executive functioning issues when they're not fully grown yet? But they do compare them to tasks that someone their age should be doing, right? So someone at age 6 should be able to say, like, do, an hour, half an hour of like homework or something, maybe a little bit less. But, right, so where they would compare it to their peers. Okay, so that's how they can kind of see, like, how is this person functioning compared to their peers their own age. So some of these executive functioning skills that are impaired. Self-awareness, so awareness of yourself, of where you stand, awareness of kind of, directing your attention. So that's where the inability to kind of self-direct attention to where it needs to be. Inhibition, so also known as self-restraint. Nonverbal working memory, so that's that ability to hold things into your mind using like visual imagery, right? So they have, people with ADHD have a very poor working memory. So things can kind of come in and go right out right away. That's why they lose their keys all the time, or lose their homework assignments, or, can't find their glasses. Emotional self-regulation. So individuals with ADHD, not only having kind of the time management and the regulation skills in school, also do have some emotional instability. So have a hard time controlling their emotions, controlling kind of how they're feeling. And usually they have very, very kind of intense emotions. Self-motivation. So this is motivating yourself to complete a task, especially when there's no immediate consequence. So, okay, this paper's due in May. It's only February, right? I have all the time in the world. They don't really know how to kind of look at, juggling their time and kind of time management. And they've done studies where people with ADHD actually see time differently than someone that doesn't have it. So they're very much in the here and now. They have a lot of issues managing time. So being able to kind of, look at the time and say, okay, it takes me about a half an hour to get to school. I should leave in maybe 5 minutes and give myself time. They're very much kind of in the here and now. and planning and problem solving. So this is basically like how we use information in our memory, right? And kind of problem solve in different ways to kind of, critical thinking skills. So they have a lot of issues with critical thinking and problem solving, thinking things through. Okay, so this is just some other kind of issues where a normal brain and someone that doesn't have ADHD has that kind of patient demeanor, can be organized, attentive, and coordinated. Where attention deficit, they're very distracted, can be confused, especially with multi-tasking, daydreaming, and hyperactivity. So what does this look like, signs of attention in the classroom? Okay, so this is someone who probably misses details, right? Doesn't really overlook their work, doesn't check up to see where they're at in assignments, careless mistakes, have problems sustaining attention, right? So including if you're talking to them with conversations, sustaining attention in class, any kind of lengthy project or lengthy reading assignment is very hard for them to sustain that attention. Not following through on instructions, failing to finish schoolwork. So, my nephew has ADHD and he does his homework, but he never hands it in. Never hands it in. He doesn't have that kind of, organizational skills to get his paper into a folder, into his bag to kind of hand it in. Okay, so they miss those kind of details and those nuances. Have problems organizing tasks and activities. So they have problems with sequence. What should I do next? What is the next step? Keeping materials and belongings in order. So usually you have to say, just look at the individual's room, or for an adult, look at their, car. And you could see there might be some of an ADHD issue going on because they're usually very disorganized and not able to kind of organize their workspace. Have a lot of problems with time management and failing to meet deadlines. Avoiding tasks that they dislike or that have that component of having to sustain a lot of mental attention. So this could be schoolwork, homework, right? Preparing reports, completing forms, reviewing lengthy papers. So really kind of tasks that you have to really kind of concentrate for a long period of time, that can be a big issue. Losing things, losing school supplies, pens, books, homework, wallets, keys, eyeglasses, cell phones. Easily distracted by unrelated thoughts or stimuli. So that's why it's very important, especially in test taking. They could be very distracted by somebody next door whispering to their friend, or tapping on their pen on the desk. They're not able to kind of drown out all these extraneous stimuli. So a lot of times, and we'll see, one of the accommodations is actually taking a test in a private room because they're not able to kind of, not get easily distracted. Be forgetful in daily activities, so chores, errands, returning calls, keeping appointments. So that brings us to the hyperfocus, like you were saying, that they can play a video game for 5 hours, right? So hyperfocus is the experience of deep and intense concentration in people with ADHD. So ADHD, it's not that they don't have the capacity for attention, right? It's basically regulating one's attention to a desired task. So they do have that attention. But it's all about, helping the student kind of find what their passion is, finding what they're passionate about, because that's where they're going to hone in all their attention. Or how do we make assignments or make things more kind of meaningful to them so that they will be able to sustain that focus. So we talked about hyperactivity, impulsivity, fidgeting in their seats, not being able to stay in their seats, climbing in situations, talking nonstop. So sometimes you have students that are just constantly talking throughout like the whole, I teach psychology, and this semester I definitely have like a couple of them that just do not stop talking throughout the whole lecture. Okay. Blurt out answers before the question has been completed or waiting their turn, interrupting others. kind of talked about all that. So just want to stop, kind of gave out a lot of clinical information. Does anybody have any questions or thoughts so far? Or any cases that they've seen that
I mean, a lot of what you went over that use my daily life. My son.
with your son? Yeah. Hmm. So is he have any kind of strategies that work for him, or have you developed any strategies like with a counselor or a therapist?
He has a 504. We've tried some things to with fidget, the fidget cube, fidget spinner.
Right, yeah.
I think they tried the band on his desk chair. They can stretch with his feet.
Yeah.
Some of it works a little bit, but again, he's still having difficulty focusing
Yeah.
on things that he doesn't want to focus on. But he can hyper focus on things that he loves to do, like building Legos. He can lose himself for hours doing that.
Mm-hmm.
But pretty much everything you said rang true, what I've experienced.
And a lot of like helping someone with ADHD is kind of altering their environment, like fidget toys, things like that, helping them with planning, getting them a planner. Like my students, you tell them to get a planner, well, I'm going to lose it. Okay, so what else can we do? Planner's just one thing, right? How else can we alter your environment? Maybe put like a whiteboard in your room and write things down. Maybe use Post-it notes. There's tons of apps, because apps and phones can be really kind of time draining, right? And a lot of attention can be spent on just using your phone. There's a lot of apps that students can use that can help them with the organization. Because it's important for them to learn the skills, but also there's so many things in the environment that can need to kind of be like tailored to them.
I think the biggest thing we're struggling with right now is that his teachers don't seem to understand, because he's a really bright kid, and they look at him as he should be capable. He seems perfectly capable because he's really smart, and he's engaging when he wants to be, and they're having trouble seeing this as an actual problem. They think it's just that he's being lazy, and,
Right,
so we're having, that's the biggest difficulty we're having, is just getting that across, that he thinks differently. We need to approach teaching him differently, because he doesn't learn like these other students.
Right, and that might be something, you wish that the teachers maybe would have a training, for them to really understand that there's different things that they need to do to teach, and to really kind of be more accommodating, not so much, the laziness. And think about, like self-esteem. So many individuals have been growing up that have ADHD have been told the same thing. You're lazy, you don't care, you just have to work harder, right? But clearly it's a brain disorder. It's not something that they are 100% in control of, right? I mean, you can teach them behavioral techniques, but, and medication can definitely help, but there still needs to be an understanding of, the impairment areas that are kind of hard for them to do. So again, it is a real medical disorder, okay? The U.S. Department of Education, National Institute of Health, APA, American Psychiatric Association, all have ADHD as a mental health disorder, as a neurocognitive disorder. It is biologically based, so it's a result of chemical this imbalance of dopamine and different structures in the brain, not bad parenting, not, kind of just being too lenient, not laziness. Okay. So another myth is that children with ADHD outgrow their condition. So some will outgrow their condition, but most people, I think they say like 70% of individuals will, grow into adulthood still with ADHD symptoms. A lot of times it looks differently. A lot of times the hyperactivity kind of goes away, but the inattention and that inability to time manage usually stays. So up to 50% continue to have it in adulthood. The majority of adults remain undiagnosed, so only 6% of the adult population has been diagnosed with ADHD, okay? But only 1 in 4, even in that number, will seek treatment. So without help, adults with ADHD are highly vulnerable to different mood disorders, so depression, anxiety, and substance abuse. I think it's like they're 70 or 80% more likely than someone that doesn't have ADHD to have a co-occurring substance abuse disorder. And again, it's something that, early intervention is really the key, because what happens when they go to college, right? One of the biggest things that I hear from my students that have ADHD is, in high school, everything was so structured. I knew exactly where I need to be every day. I saw the same teachers, like everything was so highly structured for me. And then once I came to college, I'm going to class once a week or maybe twice a week. They're 3-hour classes. And it's just really hard for me because the teachers aren't really giving me kind of, ways to get an assignment done. There's just kind of deadlines, and I'm off to kind of figure out the different steps on my own. So that can be, a big switch for them, a big kind of like culture shock. So ADD affects girls just as likely as it affects boys. The numbers for boys are higher, but a lot of times boys show more of the hyperactivity, so they're the ones getting more diagnosed because they're the ones in the classroom that are annoying the teachers, right? As opposed to girls that have usually more of the inattentive type and that are more quiet and kind of slip beneath under the cracks. So why is it so hard to motivate someone with ADHD? Traditional methods don't work, right? Giving them rewards don't always work. Giving them punishments don't always work. And it's because their ADHD brain differs very differently structurally, right? That impacts motivation. So we said the executive functions have different levels of activity. Dopamine, right, which is basically is in charge of those reactions to with rewards and successes and failures, right? And if it's not working correctly, they're not so apt to really caring about rewards or failures or success. So along with counseling, and there's this uptick of having ADHD coaches now. I don't know if you've heard about that. There's people, if you want to get counseling for some of that ADHD, clinicians, I think just general clinicians might have like an idea about it, but don't really have like a really kind of like grasp on it. So it's good to find somebody that is specializes in ADHD. Sometimes they're called ADHD coaches or mentors that can really help your students or your children really kind of gain the skills. But the other popular form of medication is stimulants. Okay? So there's different types of stimulants. There's methylphenidates and amphetamines. So methylamphetamines have been shown to be a little bit more effective with children. Amphetamines most effective with adults. It's a typo. Okay. We talked about why stimulants work. So again, like medication is really, it can really help. So they say if you don't have ADHD and you take an Adderall, you're probably going to be able to study, have more attention and study at night. So a lot of people abuse these drugs because they're able to pull all-nighters. But if you have ADHD and you take a stimulant, it's like, boom, life-changing. Like you're feeling this focus that you've never felt before, this kind of like energy that you're not kind of used to. So medications can be very, very effective in helping ADHD. And again, because it is, a brain disorder, it has to do with the dopamine. So these are methylphenidates and amphetamines work straight on that dopamine level. But they do have some side effects. So one of the biggest side effects is weight loss. A lot of people actually that don't have ADHD abuse the amphetamines because it can be a very tempting weight loss drug. It decreases and suppresses your appetite. Nervousness, especially if you have a co-occurring anxiety disorder, an amphetamine can really kind of make that anxiety a lot worse. Difficulty sleeping, increased heart rate, weight loss, shaking, tics, dizziness. And same with the amphetamines, Adderall, Myadis, Vyvanse, okay? Same type of thing, loss of appetite, agitation, anxiety, nervousness, emotional instability, sense of attachment. So it is really like a personal choice, whether someone might choose to give their children stimulants or not. They are effective, but there's always that kind of debate. Do you want to be giving children medication like this, right? I mean, stimulants have been around a long time, and there hasn't been any clinical kind of like important findings that they are harmful in the long term. But they also haven't looked at it that easy. But stimulants, usually you take them and they're out of your system within, I'd say like maybe 12 hours, maybe a little less. So they're fairly safe. But again, they can have a lot of different side effects. Any questions or things that you can think of that you want me to address?
Well, I think generally, it's interesting. I hadn't put together that talking nonstop, but also at one point I think not seeming to listen. In other words, right. So it sort of makes sense if I think of it in both of them. You can't really focus, or you can't be self-aware. And so when you have somebody who's not self-aware and either interrupts or, like for students this time, monopolize, talk all the time. I mean, I guess I'm just interested in strategies that you tend to use. Yeah.
Well, I would say more focusing on the behavior, right? So like my strategy would be to, obviously pull them aside after class away from, everyone else and just let them know this is what I'm noticing. I'm noticing that in lectures that, it could be very kind of distracting because you are talking to other students, and I could see that might be affecting how everybody else is kind of learning and paying attention. What do you think we can do? Maybe like a sign that I can give you, like a tap on the shoulder, some kind of like hand signal, so that you're aware of what's going on and that you're able to kind of understand and then self-regulate that behavior. So that's what I would do. Again, without kind of making a judgment about the behavior, but it's really just about dealing with the behavior and saying, I want to work with you with this. Because you're right, they don't have that self-awareness. So sometimes they need that little reminder like, hey, you're doing it again, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So students with ADHD, right, they're talking a lot, talking at a turn. Might not have, a good, easy time following instructions, presenting with lists, right? Lacks motor control. You might see that their handwriting is like horrendous because they're unable to kind of have that motor control, fine motor control. Okay. Have problems with long-term projects when there's no direct supervision. So do any of you have like long-term projects in your class? Like say like a paper that is due kind of like at the end of the semester?
Yeah. I teach English and writing.
Okay. How would you usually approach that? Do you kind of just give them the assignment and then have them just kind of do it on their own, or?
No, it's a process. So we do, we divide it into smaller portions for every session. It takes 3 to 4 weeks depending on the assignment. And actually yesterday a student came to me. He said he has ADHD. He's a music student. He's brilliant, very creative. And he said he has problem focusing. And then I said, how can I help you? He said, one-on-one, talk to me. Let me talk about my ideas. And I drew for him. I tried to use diagrams and bubbles and arrows to direct him so that he could sequence his thoughts and follow.
Yeah, they tend to be very visual learners too, so it's good to work with students one-on-one, but that's like the best way to kind of help them get that project done is to break up the project into like sections. Okay, so the outline is due this day, this is the next kind of week we're going to be starting on just the introduction. So breaking up projects for them, even if you don't want to do that in your class, but like when you meet with them one-on-one, try to come up with some segments of what you can do and actually putting deadline, even if there's no deadline, giving them a deadline, so at least they have something to kind of go off of. And that's really great, giving them, you know, the idea of making visual maps, because sometimes their thoughts are all like jumbled. So using like those bubbles of what their different ideas are and then how to connect them. So a lot of like visual kind of help. So that's wonderful, yeah. Also, when working with ADHD students, seating, you want to encourage them to sit away from like a door or a window. In fact, they really should be sitting in the front of the classroom so that they don't have that kind of like distraction, right? So encouraging them to kind of, you know, sit in front, maybe, you know, take some breaks if they need to use the bathroom, walk around the hallway for a little bit, right, to kind of just like get that physical activity up. Encourage them to create a quiet, kind of free of distraction studying. So a lot of my students will say, oh yeah, I study in my room. Okay, you know, you're studying in your room. How is that affecting you? You have your computer in your room, you're right by your phone. Your parents are downstairs, there's noise. So a lot of times it's like looking at their environment. You know, we have a great library. Try studying in the library. Or even like study with a buddy, like have a friend. Because like you said, that kind of one-on-one exchange where they can talk and get information, you know, not just by sitting in a room by themselves, is really important for them. So it could be more of an interaction and interactive. Also, it depends on the person, but some people need music to study. Some people need it completely quiet. I've heard both. But they say if you need music to study, make it something that has no vocals in it, because that can be too distracting or engaging. In fact, they have a website, or is it YouTube? I forget what it was, but they have all just like game soundtracks. Because what happens in a game, it's like that just kind of constant repeating like music. It's not really anything like, you know, significant with lyrics. So something, and if a video game is something that really stimulates them, have that playing in the background, kind of like that as white noise. So delivering information. So if possible, give instructions one at a time and repeat as necessary. So it's good to give them a lot of different reminders. Okay, in 2 weeks, this is coming up. This is where you should be in this assignment. Okay. Use a lot of visuals, charts, pictures. Encourage them to color code their notes. Encourage outlines for note taking that organize information, or even those bubbles are a good idea. A lot of times note taking consists of like just trying to write word for word what the professor's saying, and that's not very meaningful to them. So having them write notes in their own words, or be able to create visuals or write kind of ideas in bubbles and be able to connect the bubbles together. So as far as working with a student with studying, right, encourage them to study the way they do best, such as orally. Sometimes just like talking out loud can help them, stimulates different senses. Like we said, pay attention to their study environment, maybe music or no music. Their physical environment is key. Encourage them to do the SQ3R technique for active reading. Has anybody ever heard of the SQ3R technique? Yeah?
Yeah, when the study, quiz, reflect.
Study, question, write, read, recite. Mm-hmm. So it's more kind of like an active, engaging reading. So the first kind of, the S is basically a survey. So you're just looking at the chapter, noting what the topics you're going to be reading about, what is the overall kind of feel of the chapter. And then the Q is question. So after your survey, what kind of questions do you have? What do you want to learn more about, right? Look at the bold words. Maybe it could be, what does a cell mean, right? What does this term mean? This is what I want to learn more about, or how do these two concepts connect? So it encourages more active learning and active reading. And then actually reading it. And what I tell them is, again, don't just put verbatim what's in the text. Write things, look at each paragraph, and then give a brief kind of like, you know, sentence about what that means to you in your own words. Okay. Does anybody have any other questions about?
What's the third R?
So yeah, so survey, question, read, recite, and review. And then just reviewing everything. So again, that, instead of just kind of reading just to get the words in is not going to help them. So it's more of kind of like a strategy to actually reading. Encourage students to divide long-term projects into segments, and like I said, assign a completion goal for each segment so that they have some kind of timeline. So as far as organization, encourage students to keep a master binder with a separate section for each subject. Instead of having like 4 different notebooks for each subject, maybe just have like a multi-subject notebook. Pockets where you can put the syllabus. I always say, I put my syllabus on Blackboard, but I always say you have to print out your syllabus if that's something that is kind of going to just go by the wayside. You're not going to look at it. Print it out and have it in front of you. Make copies. Put it on your whiteboard, right? Put it in different locations. Check it a couple times a day. Pair it with maybe when you're eating breakfast or when you're eating, dinner at night. Make it like a routine, because that's very important for people with ADHD to develop different routines so that they're doing something the same time all the time. Same thing with studying. When you're helping them with a time budget or looking at their week, I say maybe on a Sunday morning when you're with the family, work on your time budget and everything that you're going to do for the week. Make sure your study blocks are pretty similar each day in each week. So you might study for your history class on Mondays from 5 to 6. Make that consistent throughout every week so your body's going to just know exactly what to do. The more consistency, the better. So definitely writing stuff down. So that's important, to have them constantly writing stuff down. And usually not in different notebooks, but in one kind of central notebook where all of their school supplies are. Advising for classes. So encourage early registration, right? Because there's a lot of factors that come into play. So if I tell them, if you're not a morning person, do not schedule classes in the morning. And the only way to do that is really the first day that, advisement and registration opens, make sure you do it early so you have your pick. Also think about evenings. A lot of times if a student is on medication, the medication wears off usually during like 3 to 4 in the afternoon. So maybe evening classes might not be the best time. So you want to ask them what is the most kind of like alert time during the day that you can study or that you're going to pay your most attention, right? When does that usually peak? So that they can schedule classes in that way. And have a conversation about their major. Encourage them to come to counseling and take a career assessment, because again, they can hyper-focus and get excited about things that they're passionate about, but we find a lot of students that they're in a major because their parents want them to do that, right? Or my mom was a nurse, so I should be a nurse too, right? But if they're not passionate about it, they're going to go to the classes and they're just going to zone out. So it's really important to have that conversation with them. What subjects are you passionate about? What can you really see yourself doing? And then refer them to us and we can give them further career assessments so we can help them kind of, hone in on what the best major is for them. So just some accommodations that ADHD students can get. Written instructions rather than verbal, help with reading assignments, ability to record lectures, a note taker, because again, their handwriting can be really kind of sketchy sometimes. Sit in exams in a quiet location. So, a lot of times they'll be able to take their exam at the at accessibility services because they really need that quiet location or even an extra time when taking exams. Extra time for finishing assignments. Reduce course load. So a lot of times they can excel if they're part-time students, but taking that 4th or 5th class can be really overwhelming to them. And a lot of times it's other people that are making them go full-time. But if you notice they're only doing well in like, say, 3 classes and the other classes they're just completely failing, maybe it's time to have that conversation about maybe possibly going part-time. Okay, and maybe making things up in the summer, right, to keep on track. So like we kind of talked about dealing with disruptive classroom behavior. Okay. So working out a couple of warning signs. So again, you never kind of want to confront the student in front of the other classmates, right? Because they can feel shameful or really feel kind of, defeated. So you always want to take them aside and explain the behavior, not, what is this about, or what are you doing, or, you're not paying attention. Just, this is what I'm noticing. I'm noticing that, when there's about 10 minutes left in class, you're kind of putting your backpack on, and you're kind of, just what I'm noticing is that it can be a little bit disruptive to the students. So what can we do to where you're able to kind of delay that, right? If I notice that you're kind of reaching for your bag, can I give you a signal? Can I give you a tap on the shoulder? Something like that, like work with them. Because again, they might not be aware that they're really doing it. They don't have that self-awareness. Okay.
Just a note, sorry to.
No, yeah, I'm at the
The
end, so.
the last thing about just sort of letting mild, unintentional stuff go by. It's very, it's an easy thing to do in a way, but I found it's good to bear in mind that there's degrees, and what happens is usually by some subtle signals in the group, people with a mild version tend to just do a little less of what they're doing, by the end of the semester, just sort of conform a little more, So that can sometimes, and rather than making an issue of, or once in a while they say something really sort of off topic, it's sort of like, so what, people smile or whatever, it's not a big deal.
Yeah, I mean,
So
if it's,
having that in the back of my head has helped.
Picking your battles, right?
Exactly.
If it is something that is really getting disruptive,
Then that's,
right?
that's different. Yeah.
Right,
So
because
sometimes it's not easy to exactly know the line, but
Mhm.
it's, you can bear in mind, there is a line, and
Right.
disruption is it, yeah.
Yeah, and just kind of letting them know, like, I'm here to help you out in this class.
Mm-hmm.
What kind of like signals or what can we do to kind of help curb this behavior
Yeah.
instead of making it personal, to them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So I covered a lot in a couple of like 20 PowerPoints. I want to make sure that you don't have any kind of other questions or some other things that I could hopefully answer for you. What are your thoughts?
Maybe we have students who have not been diagnosed.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And how can we, and I feel, and I notice some symptoms. How should I address that?
So I would address, when you say you've noticed that they have some symptoms,
Yes.
are the symptoms severe enough where you feel like it's interrupting the class, it's getting in the way of them completing their homework, their assignments, doing well in the class?
Yeah, I have students who side talk all the time.
Mm-hmm.
I have students who attend every session, they never submit assignments. And I keep going to them, pursuing. So when are you going to hand in that assignment?
Mhm.
It's okay, you can submit a late assignment, just lose some points. But
Right,
I
you lose
accept late
points. Mhm.
assignments, yeah. I actually give them 2 deadlines most of the time. The second deadline I say for ESL students or students who need more
Yeah.
time. So
Mhm.
the deadlines, due dates are not 1 day, but 1 week.
Right.
If you're ready, submit it on Monday. If you're not, by Wednesday is good too.
Mm-hmm.
And some submit on Monday, some submit on Wednesday.
Right.
Yeah, but I think that that's not enough. The student needs to
Mhm.
get counseling.
Oh, sure. And if you're noticing this pattern of behavior, it's a good idea to talk to them about it. Like, this is what I'm noticing. I'm noticing that you're doing well on the exams, but the assignments, you're just not handing them in. I'm wondering if there's maybe some other resources that can kind of help you. We have a counseling office at the college that they have different resources and maybe give you some strategies on kind of like getting your homework in on time. So the thing is, it's not up to you guys to make a diagnosis, right? You're not kind of trained psychologist, a neuropsychologist that can make these diagnoses, but they do have a resource within the counseling office. So we're all, we all understand ADHD, but as far as diagnosing and getting them kind of on the right treatment, I mean, we have a lot of resources that we can give them. So help them with managing their time, study skills, behavior issues. And if they need something a little bit more, or if they really, maybe they've never been diagnosed, we can refer them out to places that we know that they could get the proper kind of diagnosis to.
So in another college, once it happened, this student left a note on my desk. I teach English, so it's very common that they share something with me in a writing assignment about themselves, or just like that student left a note for me. He said, "I want to die. Help me, please, please, please." And then I called the student affairs, and then he was hospitalized later. And I saw him coming back to school the next year. Should I just talk to the student and say, you need to go to counseling and get help? Or should I call counseling and say, I have a student that I feel needs help? What should I do?
Yeah, I mean, I think having, the reason why they reached out to you is because they trust you.
Yeah.
If they didn't trust you, they would keep it to themselves. So I think that's really a compliment to you. I would confront them about, listen, I've got this note, and, it seems like you're going through a lot right now, and I want to help you out and support you. I mean, you can, if it's something like that where it has to do with, we never know if they're serious or not. I mean, you have to kind of take it seriously if they're going to say something like that. You can walk them down to counseling. You can give us a call and say, I have a student. And you can just tell them, the counselors here are really great. What's going to happen is they'll just talk to you. Maybe they have some resources to help you. It's all like confidential. So, but let's walk together. And you can even use a name. Like there's a counselor there, Lisa, that's really great. Use a name so they kind of can make that connection that you're familiar with the office.
Yeah.
But yeah, I would say walk them down, especially if it's something that is a connotation of suicide.
Yeah.
You don't want to just send them off by themselves. You do want to walk them down to the office.
Yeah.
And if it's after office hours, because we close around 4:30 or 6:30 on Mondays and Thursdays, you definitely want to call public safety.
Oh, okay. So a girl last week came to my office and said, I know what I want to write about for her essay, but I can't write it down. And she showed me her notes, and I thought, she's got it. She just has to write it. She has a very good outline and clear ideas. And then she said, I feel weird. I don't know what's wrong. She couldn't name the emotion or the problem, what she was feeling.
Right.
And I checked the counseling web page. It seems there are different types of counseling. So
We do it all.
Yeah,
we really do.
I didn't know where to direct her exactly, but I just gave her that link in that page. I said maybe she can find what kind of help she needs to get.
Yeah, so we do a variety of things, but something like that where she's just kind of struggling, in any of those cases, if a student is struggling, you want to direct them to counseling.
Yeah.
But what you can do is, if it's, for the future too, and you can even do it now, we have a student issue notification tool.
Okay.
So let me show you. So this is for faculty that are concerned for students in any capacity. They're not doing their homework. They've been absent a lot. They've came to me and said they have a lot of family issues. They're not good at time management, and so all of those things you would use this information tool for. So if you go to Student Life and go on Counseling, to the left, you see Faculty and Staff Resources. The Student Issue Notification tool. So the SINT, yeah. So you're going to click on that, and then you're just asked to give information, and then your account of why you feel the student needs help or what they need help with.
And not notify the student about it, or?
No, you can talk to them.
Yeah.
Depends on their relationship. But I've done this when speaking to them. I forget. I'm actually now forgetting what it was. It wasn't incredibly personal, but it was some kind of work, family issue, and so I talked to them and said, we've got this great thing on campus and this great, cafe. And so
Yeah.
I've notified them, and you can go anytime.
And it usually works a lot better that way
Yeah.
because they don't know us, right? They're just coming into a counseling office and now I'm going to see like this therapist lady, right? So talking to them before, saying like, there is resources on campus, and what I'll do is I'll notify the counseling office that that you might need some of their resources, and someone will reach out to you.
Okay.
So they feel more confident because you're giving it to them, as opposed to if you don't say anything and then here I am sending them a message like, oh, guess what? Like a lot of times they'll be like, oh no, am I in trouble?
Right.
Is my professor like, telling on me, to the counselor? So that's why it's so good to let them know what's going on, that you are concerned for them and you want to get them help. And so a counselor will be, contacting you, and they're really great. They have a lot of resources to help.
Yeah, that's right. And I'm remembering now it was somebody who was just really doing terribly on multiple choice, but good in other things. And so, but it helped to just sort of talk to her after class about, look, this seems to be this big gap, and I know it's hard, and maybe you could get some help there with it. But I think my feeling was that after that, she was sort of amazed that I took the time to be interested,
Right.
Which, it's, so rather than, and I've also sometimes given a student a card, like Lisa's card.
Sure.
Then they, when it's not an urgent crisis, but just when
Right.
it's something that, it might be helpful, here's your card, which sort of means more than go to the website, even though they can do that.
Yeah, it does. I mean, as maybe some professors don't realize, you have a big influence on them, and they do look up to you, and even like you said, the fact that, wow, my professor's noticing that I'm struggling and they're actually taking interest in me and wanting to help me, that means a lot. That means a whole lot, and they remember those interactions and they value those. So,
It's interesting that she really changed. She was a tough kid, and really changed after that.
Yes.
So, it makes sense that a lot of that tough thing is just armor,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Any other questions or scenarios that you might want to work through with me or process, like what should you do, or more information that you would like to know? No? You're good? Okay.
So where are you on campus?
So I'm in the SCC building 118. So downstairs on the first floor. So what we do, myself and the other 3 counselors are all licensed mental health counselors. So we all are clinicians, which is very rare for a 2-year school to have, actually. So we all can do therapy, but we also deal with the academic, not just the personal piece as well. So time management, study skills, test taking, test anxiety, anything like that. We can, that whole kind of just encompassing student success we work with.
Will the slides be available anywhere on the website? I would recommend my colleagues to go through them.
Yeah, definitely. And I can, if you want, I can actually send you, if you write your email, I could send you my PowerPoint slides too, if anybody wants them. Also, I want to just give some resources that I feel are really important. So just in conclusion, right? So just some takeaways. Medication can help, but skill building and behavior modification is just as important. Okay, so a counseling referral is very important. If you feel like there's a student that, you don't know their diagnosis, but they're struggling with certain behaviors and certain kind of like aspects that you suspect might be ADHD, or you think, is causing them kind of stress, then definitely refer them to us. Time management is critical, so if you can help students break down assignments, a lot of reminders and notifications is great. They're very rejective sensitive, so again, try to focus on the behavior, not critique. Just focus on the behavior. This is what, I want to help you work on. How can we work on this together, type of thing. And just that, try to be empathetic, because again, these are students that have been told pretty much their whole life, you're lazy, you're not a good student, you're not going to make it in college, right? So there is that emotional component too. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Go ahead.
You sure?
Well, this may actually have something to do with it, but I know students who've found meditation helps to be very helpful, because of course they're really working on your ability to notice, just to attend.
Exactly.
And to not be bothered by the fact that lots of other stuff is going on in your head. So it's sort of like the perfect muscle building for that part of the brain. So I just wonder if you ever, prescribe it, or, or something like that.
Yeah, that's always a
This is
part of
free
the
apps.
treatment.
Yeah.
There's a lot of free apps, meditation, but we always kind of do that mindfulness, and I give them
Yes.
mindfulness exercises, because their attention's kind of all over the place, and mindfulness kind of trains your brain to bring yourself to the present and noticing things around you. So that's, and that's another kind of a test as to why counseling can be so great.
Yeah.
Right? Because they can be taught some of these techniques to kind of bring themselves back in the moment.
Yeah.
There's also a lot of apps. This is a great website. It's called attitudemag.com. But they have a lot of different resources. So this article that I found, the 17 best assistive learning tools for students with ADHD. So there's text to speech. They have ones that help with math, help with writing, getting stuff done, finishing assignments, limiting distractions. So they have apps that will actually shut off sites for a specific amount of time. Time management apps, which I think are amazing. Okay, so there's a lot of resources for them. And this is actually a great, if you want to learn more about ADHD, or even for parents, I don't know if you know this website, Rick, but this is a great website. It's called attitudemag.com. It's an actual magazine, but their online version has everything. So they have different subjects like medication and treatments for parents, different issues. And if you put yourself on the mailing list, like I'm on their email list, they must email me at least like once a day, but they're kind of like down to earth articles. You don't have to be like a clinician or like a psychiatrist to understand it. They're very kind of user friendly in layman's terms of what things are. So lots of great information on this app, on this website.
Do you have CBT WhatsApp sessions?
Like cognitive behavioral?
Yes.
Yeah, so it really depends on the orientation of the counselor, but most of us are like CBT clinicians, where we do a lot of cognitive behavioral treatment with the students.
Do you have groups sessions, or are they one-on-one?
This semester we started having groups. So we have an anxiety group and a healthy relationships group. So we're going to see how that goes. We've had a decent turnout, and the students that have come to it actually want to continue to come. So yeah, and it's a good way to reach a lot of different students, at the same time through groups. So, yeah. Okay. Thank you guys so much. It was so good to meet you in person.
I call her.
Oh, you're welcome.
I think that maybe this semester there hasn't been quiet, but there's definitely been some. Yeah.
Yeah, it's been kind of
Can't be
quiet,
accused of
but
not using the resources.
yeah. But that SINT tool is really an amazing tool. So next time you have any kind of issue with a student, just shoot us a SINT case, and we'll definitely get back to you and the student within like a couple days.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you guys so much.